Greetings from the Chester Historical Society in New Jersey. I am Ed Ng, and I will be introducing the video on the Chester Furnace Historic Site. I will be covering the first 100 million years of the history. Then I will hand over to trail steward Bruce Clark and videographer Alex Louie, who will take you on a tour of the site in the year 2021 AD. I will be using this laser pointer to highlight various elements of each slide, so please pay attention. We will get to 100 million years ago in a couple of slides. Let's start a bit more recent, 13,000 years ago. First, let's talk about the Chester Furnace's location in Chester by the Black River. It wasn't an accident. This is what the furnace site may have looked like 13,000 years ago. Yes, complete with giant caribou and woolly mammoths. And the indigenous people, the Lenape, who aren't shown. The area was in the grips of the last ice age. However, the Wisconsin ice sheet did not get as far south as Chester, and where it stopped helped create glacial Lake Sakasana. After the ice sheet retreated, the river started flowing again, but a marshy, flat area was left. That is now the Black River Wildlife Management Area in which the furnace site is located. Why is that important? First, there is a nearby source of water for steam engines and other uses. Second, the area is relatively flat, so railroads can be used to transport freight, raw materials, and people. For the third important reason, we need to jump ahead to 1867. In 1867, the Beers Atlas map shows Chester as a prosperous town benefiting from being located on two main roads, one north-south and the other east-west. As the story goes, Theodore Perry Skellenger, who preferred to be called Perry, was digging an ice house in the backyard of his two properties on Main Street. He finds a block of black rock, which he recognizes as iron ore. It could have looked like this rock, which is magnetite iron ore, so called because it is magnetic. Perry's discovery was a big deal. Now let's take a look at the 100 million year old bedrock for Chester on this map. But first, let's get oriented. Here's Chester. Here's the Chester Furnace. We have the Black River running this way through the diagonally across the map. We have Route 206, of course, which didn't exist then, running right up through the middle of the map. And Route 24 comes in on the eastern side, comes up past Seward's Hill, makes a big turn, comes through Chester, and then heads through Hacklebarney. The diorite bedrock is indicated by this orange color. Diorite is an uncommon type of bedrock. The pickaxe symbol indicates the location of iron mines. The iron ore seam that Perry Skellenger found ran the full length of Main Street and then up North Road. Perry Skellenger and other shopkeeper, farmers, and landowners soon dug their own mines in the diorite bedrock, hoping to strike it rich. As you can see, most of the mines are close to the furnace. Water, flat terrain, and nearby iron ore were the three important factors, but another important factor was the financial backing from Chester investors. William J. Taylor came to Chester from Highbridge and built the most advanced blast furnace in the United States. He was an engineering genius, but also a scientist who published articles in engineering journals. Here is the only known picture of the Chester furnace taken in the 1880s. At its peak, the furnace was producing 43 tons of pig iron a day. 125 years later, this is what the Chester furnace site looks like. How did we get from this to this? What happened? The answer will be explored in upcoming videos and articles. The first is a video with Bruce and Alex taking us on a hike through the Chester Furnace Historic Site and highlighting the historic remnants. Another video will highlight why the Chester Furnace was successful, including our best reconstruction of the blast furnace developed by William J. Taylor. Another video will feature the people of the Chester Furnace Historic Site, from the indigenous peoples, the Lenape, to the father of the Chester Furnace, William J. Taylor, to the miners and furnace workers who were there in the 1880s. To the 21st century, where we have the Taylor family now living at the historic site, along with Len Taylor, the father of the Chester Furnace Historic Site, and some recent preservation workers. The third item are articles in the Chester Historical Society News and Views, with the first article in the November 2021 newsletter, A History of the Chester Furnace Historic Site by Ed Ing, and The Pleistocene Ice Age of Chester, New Jersey by Professor John Pupper. Okay, lace up your boots. Here we go into the Chester Furnace Historic Site with Bruce Clark and Alex Louie. Enjoy. Don't forget, use your imagination.
Well, thank you, Ed. That was a great context setting for today's hike. I'm Bruce Clark with the Morris County Adopt a Trail program. For those of you who may not be familiar with the program, it's an all-volunteer effort overseen by the Morris County Parks Commission that affords participants the ability to have some good quality time outside and also help maintain the hiking trails across Morris County. In terms of brief background, when I was assigned this trail over 10 years ago, I honestly did not have a solid clue about the historical significance of this site. It was only afterwards that it started to come to light, and frankly the information about this site and understanding of it continues to evolve as new information comes to light. So I hope you are all ready for a journey back in time. If so, let's go. We are in the main parking lot for the trail on the corner of Tannersbrook Road and Furnace Road in Chester Township. This lot has plenty of room for vehicles and also provides easy access to the trail. Looking at an overhead map of the trail, we're here in the lower left corner. You can see the entire end-to-end trail by following the bright yellow line. If we now look at the same map, but this time with all the different historical features added in, you can get a sense of how much history is associated with the trail. Once we enter the trail, after just a short walk, we come to a proverbial fork in the road as the trail splits in two directions. If we follow the trail to the left, we'll cross an open field and enter a large stand of symmetrically planted eastern white pine trees. Like so many things about this trail, you would probably never guess that these trees were planted as a reforestation project during the Great Depression by the Civilian Conservation Corps, also known as the CCC. The CCC was a national effort established in 1933 as one of the programs in President Roosevelt's New Deal and was designed to provide conservation-oriented work for the unemployed. When you get the opportunity to actually visit the trail, you'll see that a number of informational placards have been posted along the trailway. We've included a selection of these placards as part of this video. Most of the CCC participants were young men between the ages of 18 and 25. Those that were accepted into the program were awarded room, board, and medical care in addition to earning $30 a month, $5 of which they could keep, with the remaining $25 being sent home to their families. The local chapter of the CCC that planted these trees was headquartered over in Hacklebarney State Park, which also benefited from their efforts to improve the park trails and facilities. Returning to our fork in the road, if we head to the right, we enter a part of the trail that used to be an active railroad line. This railroad line was built in 1873 and went from High Bridge to our west through Long Valley, then known as German Valley, and led directly to the Chester Furnace. Visitors to the trail often ask, what happened to the railroad? The rails and ties actually outlived the furnace by about 70 years and remained in place until the early 1960s when the property was acquired by the state for the Green Acres program. Just a short distance ahead, we come across the first indication that we're traveling back in time. Soon the railway bed starts to gain elevation, and if we look down and to our right, we can see the stone foundation remnants of a train station that overhung the embankment and was built over 100 years ago. Although we don't have an actual photograph of the station, we believed it looks similar to this. If we look off to our left, we get an extremely scenic view of the Black River Wildlife Management Area. Continuing along the railway bed, we soon come to a large fieldstone bridge over the Black River, which is also known as the Lamington River. Just as with the rail line itself, the bridge was also constructed in 1873. Jumping ahead to the current day, when you view the bridge from the vantage point of Furnace Road, you can see the impressive stonework that remains in great shape some 150 years after it was put in place. Looking again at our map, we are here in the middle where the Black River crosses the trail. Well, here we are on the railroad bridge, and you can see behind me the remnants of a dam. This is actually not part of the furnace site per se, but has a very interesting history of its own. As it turns out, back in the early part of the 20th century, right after the First World War and the raging Spanish flu pandemic, a predecessor company, electric utility company to JCP&L, decided to build a resort community for their employees and the families in the Black River Vista behind me to the north. And their plan was to create a lake for which they needed this dam to flood the area. And unfortunately, the surveying for this project proved faulty. And when they dropped the gates of the dam, it overflowed the main north-south thoroughfare, leading from southern New Jersey up to the northern New Jersey segment before Route 206 was created. So apparently they couldn't resolve the engineering problems, and the project was abandoned in the early 1920s after a number of half-acre plots were sold to eager employees and their families. So kind of a sad story, and once the project was abandoned, it remained pretty much as you see it today, from that point on. As we continue along the rail bed and get closer to the site of the furnace, we come to a point where the trail veers off into the woods. When you hopefully get an opportunity to hike the trail, be sure to wear sturdy footwear. The reason for this is that the trailway beneath your feet frequently includes pieces of sharp-edged slag, which has a volcanic appearance and is an unwanted byproduct from the production of pig iron. When the furnace was in operation, slag was created continuously as the iron ore was melted. The workers then moved the slag into large mounds that you can find throughout the furnace site, one of which we are about to walk over. As we approach the main site of the furnace operation, one of the first features we come upon is the stone foundation of the workers' latrine. When the furnace was in full production, the operation required about 100 workers, and this is where they addressed their calls of nature. When a Rutgers archaeology team came to the site in the 1980s, they excavated numerous artifacts from this latrine pit, including clay pipes that had fallen out of the workers' pockets, as well as flasks of gin for after-work relaxation, and bottles of milk of magnesia to help settle upset stomachs the morning after. As we continue along the trail, just ahead we come upon the remnants of the furnace ore roaster. The ore roaster played a critical role in the operation of the furnace and was used to remove impurities, particularly sulfur, from the raw iron ore prior to going into the blast furnace. The roasting process first involved breaking up the ore into small pieces, which were then loaded into the roaster. Each load of ore was then heated by about 2.5 tons of anthracite fuel, which is a type of coal with high carbon content, to about 1100 degrees Fahrenheit to drive out the sulfur in the form of a gas. Although you wouldn't know it by the few fire bricks that remain, the furnace ore roaster was 36 feet high, had a 14-foot outside diameter, and was operated by 3 to 4 men that typically roasted about 50 tons of ore per day. Here's the photograph of the Chester furnace that Ed showed in the introduction. The ore roaster that we were just looking at is off to the right side of the photo and labeled as the ore kiln. In the left foreground, you can see a small locomotive and rail car. Here's a close-up of the furnace site that shows the prominent furnace stack on the left. For those that are not familiar with iron making, a furnace is a facility that processes iron ore into a basic form of iron that can be then worked into usable products such as train car axles. As Ed described earlier, given the abundance of local ore, the furnace was constructed here in Chester to reduce the need to transport the raw ore to more distant locations for processing. The Chester furnace was considered to be state-of-the-art technology at the time, and once the furnace was started, which was referred to as being in blast, hence the term blast furnace, it remained in operation 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and ran at about 2800 degrees Fahrenheit, which is the melting point of iron. The furnace stack was 60 feet tall and was 13 feet across at its widest point. The Chester furnace began operation in 1878 and was producing 300 tons of pig iron per week by 1880. In terms of ingredients and proportions, a ton of pig iron required 2.1 tons of iron ore, 1.6 tons of coal, and 1.9 tons of limestone. A detailed description of the operation of the furnace is available on the Chester Historical Society website. Although the furnace experimented with some different types of iron in its early days, for most of its 10-year operation, the Chester furnace produced pig iron, which required that limestone, a chunk of which is shown here, be added to the iron ore in the furnace in order to produce usable iron. In terms of proportions, production of a ton of pig iron required 2 tons of ore and nearly a ton of limestone. As we continue along the trail, off to the left is a large pile of raw limestone that was abandoned after sinking prices for the sale of iron led to the demise of the furnace in 1891. Another question that is frequently asked is how the term pig iron came about. During the iron making process, the liquefied iron was cast, meaning poured, into shaped sand molds that produced bars of iron that were referred to as pigs. Although no one knows for certain, purportedly the pig in pig iron comes from the configuration of the molds that the liquid iron is poured into, which roughly resembled several baby pigs suckling at their mother. Just ahead on your right is a side path that leads to an open well, the furnace cistern. The operation of the Chester furnace relied on a number of powerful steam engines to perform critical functions. The most important of these functions involve supplying a steady stream of high-pressure air to accelerate the fiery blast of the furnace, powering the machinery that crushed the iron ore prior to being introduced into the furnace, and pumping water from the adjacent Black River into the cistern. The cistern is 10 feet deep, lined with bricks covered by waterproof cement, and acted as a reservoir to deliver a ready supply of water through iron pipes and rubber hoses to the steam engines, as well as to the blast furnace itself to help with cooling. Referring to our map, the red oval marks out the rough dimensions of the furnace site as seen in the historical photograph. As we continue along the trail and come to the Furnace Road trailhead, we can get an insight into the human aspect of the furnace operation. As mentioned earlier, the furnace employed about 100 workers at its peak. In terms of living arrangements, while many of the furnace workers rented rooms in town, a few lucky employees with families were able to live in wood-framed houses near the furnace. These structures were built in clusters or patches, hence the term patch house, and typically were 2 stories tall and had a partition through the middle with one family on each side. Each patch house generally followed a standard layout with a cellar, parlor, kitchen, and 2 or 3 bedrooms upstairs. After our roughly 1.5 mile hike, we come to the stone foundation remains of 2 of these patch houses right along the side of Furnace Road. Well, here we are at the end of our hike. I'm standing by an informational kiosk, and there's a similar one by the cistern earlier on the trail. And this was created as a scouting project by a local Eagle Scout, Jack Suter, back in 2015. You can probably get a sense, but no detail, that there's a lot of additional information that's available about the site that we weren't able to feature in the video. And if you hike the site, you'll actually see that we created a variety of informational placards at different points along the trail to kind of give you a self-guided educational experience, if you will. In the kiosk, you'll also find the comprehensive map of the site that we showed earlier that details all of the surviving features of the furnace operation that you can see when you visit the trail. Thank you for joining us during this short walking tour of the Chester Furnace Historic Site. We hope you've enjoyed it. Before we leave you, I'd like to thank the many organizations and individuals that have helped make the trail what it is today. Special shout-outs go to the Chester Historical Society, the Morris County Park Commission, the New Jersey Division of Fish and Wildlife, local residents Len and Lois Taylor, who pioneered the exploration of the furnace site, our videographer Alex Louie, and of course Ed Ing, president of the Chester Historical Society and long-standing champion for documenting and preserving the story of the Chester Furnace. For more information about the furnace site, as well as access to a fascinating online library about historic Chester, be sure to visit the Chester Historical Society at www.historicchesternj.com. And for those who would like to learn more about the Adopt a Trail program, please visit the Morris County Park Commission website at www.morrisparks.net. Thanks again for joining us on this video tour. Please come over to the trail and see all of this for yourself.